Thank you, Lisa. Some of you guys have already met me today. I think pretty much everyone in the room at this point I think I know, except for a few unfamiliar faces. So we're just going to dig in here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about redefining real-time news in digital media. So real-time news is something that we talk about all the time, but really getting a grasp of what that actually means and what that means in the world that we're reporting on today. So we no longer live in a world of journalism that's defined by the medium that it's encased in. Digital journalism really describes so many aspects of what we're doing in news today. From publications that deliver long-form editorial content, to short-form documentaries, to investigative video pieces, to live blogging, to dynamic features that are harnessing all of these things in one, digital has really opened up a boundless space for journalism to thrive. In 2011, I entered this world myself. I was working for the Dublin-based news organization called Storyful. At the time, there were only about 10 journalists on staff, but they were a group of really dedicated and passionate people obsessed with speaking the truth to stories that were breaking on social media. We quickly grew into a company that to some degree changed the way that major news organizations were really harnessing social media. While the tools and the technology behind the team were and still are impressive, the journalistic values was in the people themselves. So they were judiciously choosing stories that resonated and dedicatedly verifying the information and content that was coming in from local sources the world over. This is something I actually wrote about myself at the time in an attempt to document my own personal experience launching a career in journalism in this new digital landscape back in 2012. So a quick excerpt from what I had to say at the time. As I left college with a dual degree in journalism and mass communications from the University of New Hampshire in 2009, I embarked on what some saw as a virtually hopeless mission to carve out my own niche in the news world. I kid you not when I say people openly chuckled at my hard-earned diploma. Some even offered me a snarky good luck with that, and they wished me well. Understandably so. 2009 was a time when many major news networks and newspapers were significantly cutting their staff or folding completely. And I saw my own prospects getting bleaker and bleaker by the minute. Yet in the wake of the stagnation of traditional news has come a boom in new ways of both news gathering and consuming our news. So this is what I had to say at the time, and I think a lot of that still rings true to what we're going through at the moment. So while there may be some uncertainty about the future of traditional news platforms, one thing is for certain: good journalism and good journalists, for that matter, will always be in very high demand. The skills that you learn as an undergraduate translate so well into the skills that you use when working in digital. But in many ways, I never expected that they actually would. So both in journalism school and now in the realm of social media, there's value in getting as close to the story as possible. And I didn't realize that this could translate so literally into my work. Where once this meant arriving on the scene of a story to search out witnesses or playing telephone tag with potential sources, now it means connecting and engaging with those people in a real-time environment where they can instantly share content with you in the social space. So whether that be through Twitter or Facebook or on WhatsApp or across Skype. Though I may not always be physically on the ground when news is breaking, I can monitor that news now from a number of different perspectives through an innumerable number of eyes on the ground in the form of anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection. I see some of you tweeting me right now on my phone. Our pool of sources and our access to news continues to multiply at a staggering rate. And this is where traditional verification values with a social media twist come in. Translating the verification techniques and standards that were once an integral part of the newsroom to a social media platform is as simple as adapting to a new medium. While my source for content may be on a different continent, I still treat their information or their videos or their pictures as I would information from someone that I had met on the scene of a breaking news event in my own city. When I see a piece of video on a social platform, I bring the same journalistic skepticism that I was taught to bring to any source on any story and approach it with the same forensic attention to detail. While new tools are constantly emerging to harness this breaking news content, they must go hand in hand with good verification skills. Some gaps do still exist between the skills that you're learning in your journalism courses and the skills that are applicable in this swiftly changing field, particularly when it comes to specific verification guidelines. And that's because the industry continues to change at such a fast pace. And as has always been the case in journalism, experience and mentoring are key. to overcoming these issues, and no less valuable in a rapid-paced, swiftly changing environment. Pressure to feed this constantly hungry publishing beast means that young journalists are often the most vulnerable to the pressures of speed over accuracy. But the rules of journalism have not changed. Whether I'm out in the streets in Ferguson listening to residents tell stories about the unrest in their hometown, or sitting in front of my laptop in the office trying to give up to the minute breaking news coverage on an international story, trying to separate fact from fiction, the principles are no different. Though social media news functions at a speed not previously seen in a traditional newsroom, and pressures to be fast and constant with updates and breaking stories are greater than ever, there is even more of a need to pause and ask the age-old question: how reliable is my source? Am I getting the full story? And is this piece of content, this tweet, this video, this image, verifiable? In the same way, new platforms have yet to be fully explored in many well-respected journalism courses, though some courses have now started to incorporate new ways of news gathering into their curriculum. Twitter and YouTube played no role in my formal journalism education, though now I spend most of my working hours scouring both for the next big story. Luckily for those of us who grew up in a time when social media was simply second nature, many of these skills are already to some degree ingrained in us and just need to be nurtured and honed. The ease at which many young journalists can navigate new platforms can only work to their advantage. You have to learn fast that flexibility and adaptability are your greatest assets as journalists. While Twitter and YouTube dominate the world of breaking social media news today, who knows what new platforms will come into the forefront in the future. Live streaming apps such as Meerkat and Periscope, which we talked about in some of the classes today, are changing the way that we now can instantaneously respond to news stories. Journalists in the field are constantly being offered new ways to tell their own stories, while editors in the office have new ways of digging through breaking stories and finding those that resonate with their audience. What is key is being ready to try out new ways of engaging with the news and those who create it, and connecting with the communities that build up around a story on new digital platforms. Canadian journalism educator and blogger Rob Washburn commented back in 2012 that starting off your career as a journalist during journalism's newest era is like getting in on the ground floor of a major revolution, and I think he's really hit the nail on the head. Little did I know that when I first started my journey into digital journalism back in 2011, that I myself was getting in on the ground floor of a revolution and gearing up for a specialization I did not see coming. The most recent iteration of my career in the digital space comes in my role as Mashable's assistant real-time editor. So Mashable alone has a record 42 million unique visitors monthly that span the globe and 21 million social media followers. So our reach is enormous, but the platform is not alone in the digital space, which gives some idea of the scope and scale and power of this growing digital industry. But as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. And those of us doing breaking international news on these platforms could not believe in this any more so. At one time, sites like Mashable were seen by some as page view-driven sources of entertainment, and viral sharing was key rather than doing serious journalism. There was a basic level of aggregation going on across these sites and rehashing of news stories, but little emphasis on engaging real-time news in the earliest days. As these digitally native publishers grew up over the past few years, they've moved into a space where they are doing so much more than just aggregating news. So at Mashable, New York Times alum Jim Roberts is at the helm of a team of experienced and passionate journalists working in this space. He put it very well himself not that long ago when he said, disruptive as certain technologies have been to the news business, they've created much greater benefits for those of us who make a living as communicators and for our audiences. The latest iteration of digital journalism democratizes news with immediate feedback methods, socially sourced content from previously unheard of or underreported voices. It is a massive responsibility to be creating stories that we can now stand behind and deliver engaging pieces of journalism that tell important stories while at the same time are stories our audiences want to engage with. The fast-paced landscape that can sometimes harmfully thrive on captivation and intrigue also produces cautionary tales for those working in the field. While Rolling Stone is not a digitally native publisher, the level of virality of the recent UVA rape on campus story was only made possible because of the online world, the shareability of the story, and the driving force of social media that aided in its near instantaneous spread. As part of the Columbia Journalism Review's fatal postmortem investigation into the controversial piece, they touched on some universal truths about this digital space. So according to a portion of their nearly 13,000-word report on the UVA rape on campus story, the story's blow-up comes as another shock to journalism's credibility amid head-swiveling change in the media industry. The particulars of Rolling Stone's failure make clear the need for revitalized consensus in newsrooms old and new about what best journalistic practices entail at an operating manual level of detail. And the analysis went on to call it a story of journalistic failure that was avoidable. So while this description was directed at the Rolling Stone piece alone, it rings true in a journalism world that's shaped by the fast-moving immediacy of an industry that's full of head-swiveling change, as they put it. While the focus is actually a feature-length editorial piece, with months of work behind it, it rings true in this real-time news reporting world as well, and highlights the need for reassessment of how we all do business. In an age where instantaneous aggregation of breaking news has become the norm, these professional skills are more important than ever. And getting the facts right is the cardinal rule of journalism, but some media outlets continue to struggle with the ethical pillar when a big story is breaking. Verifications should never play second fiddle to the speed of output and site traffic goals. In a time when speculation is rampant in online publishing and in the world of the 24-hour cable news network, truth often takes a backseat to immediacy. This failing is more obvious than ever for newsrooms trying to deal with user-generated content that's being sourced from social media platforms. In a breaking news situation, social networks are often overloaded with situational updates with varying levels of accuracy, calls for relief on the ground, reports of new developments, but also propaganda and misinformation. So reporting the right information is really on the back of a breaking news reporter and editor like myself. Socially sourced content, or user-generated content as we like to call it, has now entered a new phase, one in which it has irrefutably fused itself into our traditional ways of telling stories. But the way newsrooms deal with this content is a bit like the Wild West, where anything goes and nearly nothing is off limits. And in many ways, while it has democratized news, in some ways it has muddied the waters as well. I just want to play you a quick clip now, take a breath, of a video that we dealt with not that long ago in my own newsroom. So some of you might be familiar with this, some might not. So I'm not sure how many of you had seen that video before. Obviously, it draws a very emotional response. It was put out back in November, and millions of people saw it on YouTube, and they were captivated by, this grainy, shaky video showing a young boy running across the street to save a young girl. And the footage really spread like wildfire on social media, collecting, like I said, millions of shares in a matter of hours. Likes and views were up. News organizations were really eager to jump on board and see how much traffic they could get out of this video. The only problem was nobody could actually verify what was going on in the footage. So it came from a sketchy source that had no YouTube account history. The name appeared to be a pseudonym. The uploader could not be reached. And they were using other proxies to disseminate the video as well, all of which had different levels of reliability themselves. And yet news organizations ran with that video and hosted it on their websites, ran it on the nightly news, partially in fear of being left out of reporting on this story that was gaining so much traction online and missing out on the conversation. Days later, BBC Trending debunked the footage that you just saw after an intense investigation. Rather than simply regurgitating the video and putting it up on their own website, they had gone through the painstaking process of dissecting all of the elements of the film. And by the end of the investigation, they had found out that a group of Norwegian filmmakers were actually behind the video, and it was staged in Malta last summer. Strangely, it was actually created with the intention of being presented as real. So at the time, BBC Trending wrote this. Lars Klevberg, a 34-year-old film director based in Oslo, wrote a script after watching news coverage of the conflict in Syria. He says he deliberately presented the film as reality in order to generate a discussion about children in conflict zones. If I can make a film and pretend it was real, people would share it and react with hope, he said. We shot it in Malta in May this year on a set that was used for other famous movies like Troy and Gladiator, and the little boy and girl are professional actors from Malta. The voices in the background are Syrian refugees living in Malta. When he was asked if they were comfortable making a film that potentially deceived millions of people, he said, I was not uncomfortable. By publishing a clip that would appear to be authentic, we hope to take advantage of a tool that's often used in war, making a video that claims to be real. And we wanted to see if the film would gain attention and spur debate, first and foremost about children and the war. And we also wanted to see how the media would respond to such a video. So this reminded me of one of journalism's treasured cliches: if your mother says she loves you, check it out. I could not fathom why no one delved a bit deeper into this video. And in the case of this footage, dozens of mainstream news outlets ran with the footage, simply citing that someone had said it was going viral, and while it was unverifiable, they should still check it out on their website. But despite all the controversies and what is often seen as the failing on the part of journalists to verify these images and videos, I truly believe that user-generated content can only make journalism richer. And it's about time there was a greater understanding within the journalism community as to what we can actually do with it. So the publication of the Web Native Verification Handbook touches on some of the challenges that are faced by those covering news in real time and trying to harness this user-generated content. According to the Verification Handbook, which was published by the European Journalism Center and edited by Craig Silverman of the Poynter Institute, it's a fundamental truth that rumors and misinformation accompany emergency situations. Uncertainty and anxiety, which are two core elements of crisis and emergency situations, cause people to invent and repeat questionable information. In short, rumors arise and spread when people are uncertain and anxious about a topic of personal relevance, and when the rumor seems credible given the sensibilities of the people involved in the spread. Fear breeds rumor. The more collective anxiety a group has, the more inclined it will be to stir up the rumor mill. In today's network world, people also intentionally spread fake information and rumors as a joke, to drive likes and followers, or simply cause panic. And as a result, the work of verification is perhaps more difficult in the very situations when providing accurate information as a journalist is of utmost importance. In a disaster, whether it's caused by something natural or human, the risk of inaccuracy are amplified, and it can literally be a matter of life or death for people involved. Yet amid all the noise and the hoaxes, there is always a strong signal bringing valuable, important information to light. Verification is really key in getting through all of the noise and reaching that signal. So when a journalist or someone working as a humanitarian professional who's trying to weed through this user-generated content finds a piece of information on content via social media or has it sent to them, there's 4 really key, simple elements that they can identify. So, is this the original piece of content? Who uploaded this content? When was the content created? And where was the content created? And these are simple questions you would ask yourself in any other aspect of your journalism, so it should be done when you're dealing with user-generated content as well. But despite all of these challenges, socially sourced content really adds a new layer to coverage that was not possible 10 years ago and not really understood even 5 years ago. I think of my own experiences recently covering Yemen, a country that I have never actually seen with my own eyes, but a country that through social media I've come to know to a certain degree and have been able to make connections with the people in it. we have access to these types of stories in ways that we never had before. So while investigating what was going on in Yemen last week, on a recent Monday afternoon, it allowed me to tell the story of how one man and his family sheltered in their apartment while airstrikes were going on outside their house. And I had access to him because of one simple tool that he was using to tell his story, and that was Twitter. The man, named Amar, had posted this really captivating series of images from his living room showing his children looking out the window on the destruction going on around them. And this intimate moment that he had captured and shared immediately drew me in, and I knew this was a story that I wanted to tell. So I chatted with him online, and he was telling me that as the night sky over the Yemeni city, the night sky outside his living room, was illuminated by explosions from a nearby munitions factory, I was gaining more insight than I ever thought possible into this community I didn't even know. Likewise, contacts with activists in Raqqa, who I've connected with through social media, have enhanced my own reporting on this isolated city in eastern Syria that's become the de facto capital of the Islamic State. Social media has allowed for a group of 16 activists who are native Raqqa residents to create a network of information dissemination to get their news out. Likewise, Islamic State militants have harnessed these platforms themselves to use them to disseminate propaganda. All of these contacts make Western coverage of the conflict richer, and I would argue that these things could not be done without the widespread use of social media due to the limited ability to move freely in this particular region as a journalist. User-generated content isn't the only aspect of real-time news that is changing the way that we understand journalism. Live storytelling in the form of streaming videos and blogs have become an integral part of most digital newsrooms. Sometimes we're finding ourselves reading into news stories that are outside our comfort zones, though, as news breaks. We're searching for new contacts and sources for stories that we may not have touched on before. Sometimes social media is pulling us into an entirely new culture that we've never experienced. And sometimes we're making it up a little bit as we go along. But this is what makes it exciting and what makes it a great industry to work in. And what is most important is to find ways to make these technologies work for the stories that we want to tell. While there's always going to be new platforms for doing real-time or breaking news in the digital space, some of them will fade, some of them will thrive, some may even replace the technologies and the tools that we're using right now. The important aspect is the truth-telling behind these stories will remain. And this is our job, to dissect fact from fiction, to report, to investigate, to interview. And the change in the medium does not mean that these things are going to go away. They're simply going to look a little bit different. So thanks very much. So I have lots of time for questions if anybody has any questions about Mashable, about my work, my experience with social media.
I looked at Mashable earlier today, and your name is all over the place. It looks like on certain days you do 2, 3, 4 stories. So, and you're also an editor, and I'm wondering how you allocate your time, number one, and number two, with all of that content, how do you manage the fact checking?
So editor is deceiving. My title is a little strange because I actually don't edit in the sense of copy editing, or I don't have anyone else's content that I have to worry about except for my own. I'm an editor in the sense that I'm kind of directing what way our coverage goes. I'm allowed to kind of have autonomy and pick and choose my own stories, but I don't actually have to physically edit people, which thank God, because I don't know how I do 4 or 5 stories a day and do that. I think my coverage ranges a lot from a quick 500-word blurb on a great video that we found that really needs to be shared, or a write-up around a beautiful gallery of images that we verified, to more investigative pieces. We're a pretty small team, so we have to be kind of nimble. I'm lucky enough to have days where I just immerse myself in one story all day long, and days where I kind of just truck away and do the breaking news cycle thing. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a balance. I think Jim Roberts, who's leading our editorial team, has a really good sense of what stories are important to us. Again, because we're not a traditional news outlet, we can kind of pick and choose which international stories we're telling that we think are going to really resonate best with us. So it's a lot, but we do have a certain level of autonomy over which stories we're choosing.
And how about the verification
Oh, the verification part. Yeah, so again, I kind of crawl down that verification hole when I need to when it comes to user-generated content. I work with another real-time editor. A lot of times we are, one of us will be verifying content while another will be writing the story. Then it goes through a series of fact checkers within our own team. So we have editors who are really deeply digging into all of our stories to make sure everything is above board. It's a pretty collaborative process, so we have most days time from them to sit down and actually properly go through our stories with us. So yeah, we have a few different editors that fact check for us.
Do you have any tips for incoming freshman students who are interested in journalism and mass communications? Because I've had family and friends constantly tell me it's a risk, but it's a risky career. Are you sure you want to do this? So how can I prove them wrong?
I think it is a risky career in the best way possible. I think there are a lot of different jobs out there at the moment, and it's risky in the sense that you might end up in a place that you never thought you were going to end up. So I never thought that I was going to be doing this job, and in 5 years' time, I might not be doing this job. I might be doing something completely different again. I think the digital space allows for you to get your hand into a lot of different things. I think it's a really thriving space. I think you might come in with the idea that you're going to write for a local newspaper and end up producing small documentary videos. I think the best thing you can do is take those classes and see what's out there and get your hand into it as much as possible. But I do think it is a thriving industry, especially in digital.
Hi. This morning there was a news story on WMUR. There was a shooting up in Gorham, and it had no details in it whatsoever. I scrolled down to the comments, and by the time I read through the 20 or so comments, I had the name of the perpetrator, the victim, details, friends of the people saying that was a good guy, that sort of thing and everything. So you will always have journalistic standards when you're reporting and everything. But in my reading the comments, I was basically doing your job, seeing what people said from social media and deciding what I believe. So I'm wondering, how can you ever have the edge if you have the journalistic standard? Because at a certain point there'll be so much information coming into any individual person that they'll be getting the details themselves directly.
I think you bring up a really good point, because I think social media and this digital space where you can instantaneously comment on stories is really democratizing the way that we think about news and the way that we do news. I think as a journalist, it's unrealistic to think you're ever going to have every single angle covered in your story. You're trying to get as many voices in as possible. But I think things like comments and things like dialogue on social media just expands that and makes it a richer experience. I don't think it necessarily takes away your competitive edge. I just think it can allow more voices to be part of the conversation around a news event. I think it really does democratize the way that we're doing news.
Megan, could you please talk about the criteria for what makes a great story for Mashable, because it is such a unique forum, and in a daily newspaper it would be one set of criteria, but what is your output for?
Yeah, so for us, we're looking for something that can be shared very easily, so something visual. Most times we'll have our stories accompanied by beautiful images, beautiful video. We're kind of targeting a younger audience, so we're working in the 18 to 30-year-old bracket. Initially, our stories all had to have a tech focus. So maybe 2 years ago, everything that we did had to have some angle of technology, and that's because the roots of Mashable are as a tech blog. And I think that they found that to be really limiting. And I think a lot of people within our organization, including Jim Roberts, decided that technology is so much of the way we're telling the story now that it doesn't necessarily have to have a tech angle, but our stories do tend to be very socially driven, very shareable. And then we have longer form features that completely blow all that to shreds, and people get a chance to do exactly what kind of story they want, so very investigative. I'd say most of our stories are very character driven as well, so they're focusing on people and personal stories.
To what extent is that driven by analytics, and and to what extent just by your sense of what a good story is? I mean, are you constrained by the analytics? You talked about creating stories that resonate with your audience. How do you know what resonates with your audience?
Well, I'm very happy I don't ever have to look at our analytics, because I think it would drive me nuts between having to monitor our newswire and monitor our analytics. We do have editors on our team that are constantly tracking how our stories are sharing. I think we still have a certain level of, again, autonomy to pick out what stories we want to do regardless of the traffic. I think it's a really healthy thing within our organization that despite the fact that our news drives a lot of our traffic, our viral videos drive a lot more of our traffic, and yet we still invest a lot of our time and our energy in doing news and doing it well. I think a lot of digital news organizations are finding that some of their main traffic drivers might not be the things that make them feel good about journalism, but having the two exist side by side gives your site legitimacy when it comes to advertisers. You can sell, way more ad space off of a very shareable video, but then allows you to have space to do good journalism too. So I don't think that it necessarily dictates the way that we choose stories. I think that we try to optimize the way that we can share them more so than choose different topics because of traffic. So if we find a headline isn't working and it's just not something that our audience is looking at, a lot of times we'll just change the headline and keep every other element of the story the same. It's just a headline that happens to share way better on social. So I think from that respect, we do care about traffic. It would be naive to say that we don't, but I don't think it drives the way that we do our stories too much, I hope.
Another question. What is Mashable going to look like in 5 years? And what's your job going to look like in 5 years?
I have no idea. And I think that's really exciting. I don't know what Mashable is going to look like in 5 months. So in some of the classes today, we were talking about Meerkat and Periscope, which are these two live streaming apps. And they're getting a lot of hype, and they're getting a lot of, journalists kind of jumping on the bandwagon and saying they're great tools. I think they're great. I mean, I will probably continue to use them. Do I think they're going to change journalism completely? Maybe. I think there could be something I don't even know about yet that's going to change journalism completely, and it's going to change Mashable completely. I think the nice thing is this digital space just opens up an entirely new realm for doing journalism. So I don't really know in 5 years what we're going to look like or what I'm going to be doing. Hopefully still something along these lines.
Been at this for a while now. Can you give us a story that you are most proud of that you have done?
Okay. So I tend to do a lot of very breaking news stuff, but probably something I'm most proud of is a feature story that I did in Ferguson a few weeks ago. We had been sent down there, our team, myself and a freelance photographer, to cover the protests after the 2 police officers were shot outside the Ferguson Police Department. And I was sent down with all kinds of safety gear with the idea that if things got as intense as they did in the fall and in the summer again, we would be there and we would be prepared. And that didn't really pan out. And it ended up being a very different story when we got down there than what we thought it was going to be. So it was actually a few different stories that I did that were more feature-y focused. But one of my proudest ones was I spoke to a local business owner, this woman, Janice, who had her business burnt down in November, so during the second set of riots. And everyone had totally forgotten her story. So she, at the time, had a load of press, and she went on CNN, and she went on MSNBC, and she fundraised a little bit. But in March, her building was still burned to the ground, and she still had no insurance money, and she still could not rebuild her business, and her life savings was gone. And I was really happy to be able to tell her story again, the story that people had kind of forgotten about. So I think for me, that was one of my proudest moments, to kind of get that information out there again and show that this is a community that is still there and still exists even when CNN turns off the camera. So.
You said this wasn't something you necessarily saw yourself doing. So when you graduated from here, what did you intend on doing with your major?
What did I intend on doing? I didn't have a clue. I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I knew that I wanted to tell really good, really engaging stories, underreported stories. I wanted to travel. And I've had a chance to do all of those things, not necessarily from one job. I think leaving university and going abroad helped me realize that you might not get your entire, journalistic package in one job, but that doesn't mean that it's not out there. So I think what I've done since that time is kind of picked up little bits of learning from every position that I've had. So yeah, I don't really think I had a clue what I was doing when I came out of college, which was probably good because then I wasn't going to be disappointed into whatever I got into. So.
To kind of go back to headlines, to say 18 between 18 and 30-year-olds is kind of the range you guys get.
Yeah.
Mostly. What would you say the best type of headline for viewing somebody from like my generation is?
Geez, I'm a really bad headline writer, so I will probably let you down on this one. But I think what we're learning is we've kind of moved past the period of like clickbait, right? So for a while, everybody had these really clickbaity headlines, like you're never gonna believe what this guy did with this snake. And you're like, I don't even wanna know what the guy did with the snake. So I think we've moved past this point of like just trying to lure people into your stories, but we still want something that's going to share well on social. So they're usually shorter. Yeah, I'll hook you up with our headlines person because I probably have very bad answers for that one. But I think we're kind of moving past a point of just being clickbaity and trying to give a tight, concise version of our story.
You talked about it a little bit earlier, but in a world where everyone's trying to get the next story, trying to get the next scoop, how important is it to go revisit something that might have been touched upon, but like you said, the CNN shuts off the cameras, everyone kind of forgets about it. And like one thing that comes to mind is like Dartford, there's still conflict going on in there, and the movement kind of ended, people are hushed about it, but there's still a lot of stuff going on. So how important is it to go back and, is that compelling to editors to pitch that kind of stuff, or is it kind of old news?
I think if you can go and reach it in a new way. So I think, going back and telling the same story that we heard 5 or 6 years ago is not going to capture an editor's attention. But I think if you can get a fresh new angle on it, editors will always be up for those kinds of stories. I think deep down inside, we all, as journalists, want to tell these amazing stories that are underreported, that are affecting change, that are, bringing about good things in the world. But again, we don't necessarily have time to do it. So I don't think it's necessarily something you would say an editor won't look at. I think it's just about finding a new angle to pitch to an editor. But yeah, like the story that we did in Ferguson, it was kind of unexpected that we happened to have the chance to go do it again. So I think it's more about seizing the opportunities to do that when you can. So, there's lots of grants and fellowships that will send people away to report on, conflict that's gone unreported for a long time. Things like that, I hope will never change. And I think editors are open to having those stories pitched at them as well. Did you have a question here before? I saw you raise your hand.
It said that you worked with Vice.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could talk about your experience with competitors.
Yeah, so everybody loves talking about Vice, which means they're doing a very good job because you guys are their target audience. So I worked with Vice. I was embedded with them for about 6 months. They were a client of Storyful's, so I was working for Storyful. And then I was lent out to their newsroom to help them optimize the way they were doing socially sourced content. So Vice News is a little bit different than Vice Magazine. Vice Magazine has been around for about 20 years. Vice News started up officially last year, I think almost exactly a year ago. And they're doing some really great new initiatives, trying to tell, again, underreported stories, big focus on video, big focus on their YouTube channel. So they are doing those kind of short documentaries. Sometimes they're repurposing it from their HBO channel and condensing it down to like a small digestible nugget. They've really mastered social sharing. And then they have some really great journalists that work with them as well as I think a pretty good network of freelancers. So some of the people that write for them aren't even based with their organization, they're just freelancing in. But yeah, they're great people, they're doing great things. There's not much else to say about Vice.
Second question. The people in this country are divided, liberal and conservative, very, very starkly right now. And most people, I think, at least that I know, get their news or get sent to New York Times, Washington Post, Mashable, through an aggregator. So I'm wondering how that affects your business model, and how do you retain eyes once they get there, if they got there through somewhere else, and if that's okay with you, and if it's possible actually to pitch some of your stories to an aggregator, and if that's something you would ever do. I mean, Drudge has his favorite news sources that he goes to, and Huffington Post and Reddit.
Yeah, I mean, things like Reddit, I don't know if I would call them an aggregator. I think it's a little more democratic than that, or at least I hope it's a little more democratic than that. I do know some people or certain newsrooms kind of push things on Reddit to try and generate traffic. I don't really do a lot of the engagement stuff myself, so I probably can't answer that question very well, unfortunately. I mean, I think people are going to get their news however they're going to get their news, whether it be through an aggregator, whether it be through scanning social themselves, whether it be going to specific sites that they want to go to. I think the important part is to get a lot of different perspectives and to go to as many as possible. But yeah, I don't really know about the aggregators, unfortunately. Anybody else have any questions? Thank you.